Well, welcome to the first week of this series called God Never Gives Up on You. For this series, we're looking at the life of a very confusing biblical character, the life of Jacob. But before we get too far into this series, I want to make sure that I give credit to where credit's due. We've drawn a lot of inspiration for this series from Max Lucado's book of the same name. So if we say anything especially winsome, there is a good chance that we have Mr. Lucado to thank for that. Now, when you open up your Bible to the book of Genesis and read about the story of Jacob, it is a head scratcher. We have the story of a man who from his youth was conniving, manipulating, and lying to get what he wanted. And what makes this such a head scratcher isn't that Jacob behaved this way. I mean, there's a ton of people out there who behave that way. No, what makes this story a head scratcher is how Jacob is chosen by God to carry on the promises that God made to his grandfather Abraham. You see, God had promised Abraham that through his offspring, a nation would be born. And that nation would receive a land that God had prepared for them and would end up being a blessing to the whole world. And Jacob was Abraham's grandson. Now, it's important to know Jacob was not an only child. He was in fact a twin and was the younger of the twins. His brother Esau was born first, and then Jacob came. Now, birth order had a lot to do with inheritance at this point in time. And the cultural convention was that the firstborn son would receive a double portion of the family estate. And since Jacob's brother Esau made it out first, even if it was just by seconds, he was the one who would have been in line to receive a double share of the inheritance and would become the leader of the family upon the death of their father. But there's this complicating factor to this. While Jacob and Esau's mom was pregnant, she received a message from God who told her that the younger of her twins would be the stronger and would end up ruling over the other, meaning Jacob was going to be the one chosen by God to carry on the promises made to Abraham. But we're getting ahead of ourselves with that detail. Jacob and Esau, they're born, and we learn from the very beginning that Jacob was of questionable character. In fact, the first story we hear about Jacob in the book of Genesis tells of a time where Esau, who loved to be outdoors and hunt, came back from the field absolutely famished. He was so hungry that he felt like he could die. So he asks his brother, who had been cooking up some stew, if his brother would share some stew with him. Not an outlandish request. You would hope that if you came home absolutely famished, feeling like you might faint or tip over at any point, and found your brother making some stew, that he would gladly share some with you. But here's where we see the questionable character of Jacob. We see in Jacob's response in Genesis 25:31, it says, Jacob said first, "Sell me your birthright." You see, Jacob takes advantage of his brother's weakened state and desperation, and he demands that he forfeit his birthright for a bowl of stew, which for reasons unknown to me, Esau does. And this is not a one-off event. Not too long after this, we find that Jacob and Esau's dad is dying, and on his deathbed, while Jacob's brother is out hunting, Jacob goes in and deceives his father, taking advantage of his weak eyesight. Jacob pretends to be his brother and steals the blessing that their dad had planned to give Esau. Everything we see about Jacob in these early years of his life point to him being a downright scoundrel. He is a lying, manipulating piece of work. Which leads us to ask an important question. Why, if Jacob is this downright scoundrel, does he feature so centrally in the story of God's people? Even when the New Testament writers refer to God, they often refer to him as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Well, that's kind of what makes this story so interesting. So two things for you to think about for this first session. The first is, and this is going to become clear through the whole story, it's just God never gives up on Jacob, which tells us something amazing about God. God is faithful God is so committed to the promises that he made to Abraham, this promise to bless the world through his offspring, that he is willing to pursue and help and protect this swindling con man. This is a story about God's abounding faithfulness. But it's also a story of hope. Our central character is not just rough around the edges, he's rough through and through. But God never gives up on him. That means that if God never gives up on him, he doesn't give up on us either. And that's the big idea that we're focusing on through this whole series. We'll see you next week.